Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we're delighted to have a very special guest, Simon Michael, who is a British crime author and a former barrister, here to talk to us about crime and law and all sorts of interesting things there, which I find particularly interesting because I have a bit of a legal background. So Simon, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to hear what you show us. How are you doing today?
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm baking in in something like 84-degree heat at the moment. But it's very nice if you can be out in it, but it's a bit hot and sweaty in an office typing away.
It's funny, I've lived in America for quite a while now, and I forget that air conditioning isn't standard. It's like everywhere in America, it's like a meat locker inside, whereas in England, you still rough it.
Yeah, I'm in a 250-year-old Georgian farmhouse, which doesn't come equipped with aircon, and it's not something that we're allowed to put in. So we just bake in the summer and freeze in the winter.
Well, that's very British of you. Anyway, Simon, thank you. So thank you so much for joining us, but of course we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Well, I am sick. I've got a cold. I haven't slept in like 3 days because I can't breathe out of my nose. It drives me crazy. But even aside from that, I would be the one with the funny accent today when we compare it to you guys. But I'll sound even worse because of my cold. And I'm so tired that I might drift in and out in the conversation. But we should be able to get through this. So thanks, Simon, for joining us and braving the heat. So listen, you were as you know, you were a barrister for 30 years, a lawyer basically, you've sounds like you've been on both sides of it as prosecution and defense, and you have sort of taken that sort of experience from that lifestyle and sort of gone and started writing with it, right, and putting some of that into your stories. So that's sort of what we want to talk about today is, taking sort of that real life legal stuff and turning it into, whether it be fiction or true crime or whatever else you can do with it, and sort of the ways that you can, I guess, accurately do that, or technically some of the gotchas around it. I don't know. So that's what we want to talk to you about today. So why don't you tell us a bit about your history and how that sort of led to writing and all that?
I'd be delighted. I've interestingly just got back from Massachusetts, where I was researching a new series for which I have been commissioned. And I spent some weeks with attorneys over there just to get the feel of Massachusetts law and procedure as compared to British. And the thing that they found so astonishing was that a barrister can on one day be acting for the defense, and the next day they can be acting for the prosecution. Whereas, as you know, in America, you're either one side of the fence or the other. And I think the advantage that a British barrister has is that they see both sides of the fence throughout the whole of their career. And so you have a much closer idea of the way that the other side thinks. And you also, I think it gives you a great deal more balance. If you're just for the defense constantly, you end up believing what your clients tell you, which is a very bad mistake. And if you do nothing but prosecution, you think that everyone is a villain, which is equally bad. So I bring to the book a slightly different slant to most American attorneys who are writing in this field. I mean, they're not a huge number of us, but the obvious ones. Grisham and Steve Kavanagh and a couple of others. But I think I'm the only one who's actually spent 37 years prosecuting and defending murderers, armed robbers, rapists, and so on. And the original idea started with my first murder trial, which they called it a cutthroat defense. I'm not sure if you have the same expression in the.
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, no, it's when the prosecution know that one of two or perhaps more defendants did the deed, but they don't know which. And so then they're great fun to prosecute because you essentially just accuse them both and let them fight it out between the two of them. And this particular case involved the shooting of an unarmed security van guard by one of two robbers. One took a real shotgun and one took an imitation. Prosecutors didn't know which one was which, so they basically charged them both and let them fight it out. And I was for, as it turned out, the guy who didn't actually have a gun at all. He was the getaway driver, but who was essentially framed by his ex-colleague. So it was an interesting case. It was a murder trial. It ended well for my guy, and I thought I'd write that in a book, which I did, and it did okay. And then I started thinking, well, I mean, I've got quite a few cases like that. I've got some absolutely delicious murder cases, and I know the facts. I know the background facts really well. So, and it's turned into a series of now 11. All of them either based on cases where I acted either for one side or the other, or in other cases, because I'm writing, I've set my history back in the 60s and 70s. They are cases which made the newspapers and the television screens in those days, and I have done exactly what a true crime writer would have done. I've researched them all, and then I have deliberately fictionalized them. And we can come on to why I've chosen to do that later on, but that's how it all started.
I mean, I will say, living in America right now with all of the crazy stuff that's going on in the legal process, it's I think it seems like a very good idea to base your fiction on real, true trials, because to a certain extent, if you wrote what is literally going on right now, people wouldn't believe it. And so you actually have to have like precedent to show that this is actually something that could realistically happen.
I agree with you. Although some of my cases are genuinely stranger than fiction, but I think the great advantage I have over someone who is doing the research from scratch, which I do in some cases, is when you've actually been involved in the case, you really understand the wrinkles of the evidence, and you know more about how the prosecution and the police, how they eventually put together a case, than you can ever do from just examination of the documents afterwards, because you get to meet the players. You actually get to meet the police officers. Sometimes, even if you're acting for the prosecution, sometimes you get to meet them during the course of the investigation. Because as prosecuting counsel, and this is something that you'll be familiar with, Craig, in the States, the DA's office works with the police officers very often. So they are the DA or the ADA is actually directing inquiries, directing the way evidence is compiled. And that doesn't happen often in the UK, but it does sometimes when you're prosecuting. So you have a huge advantage over somebody who's simply doing the research from scratch.
Yeah, and even when you fictionalize it, as you do, that sort of gives you an advantage as well, in the sense that like you don't have to come up with so much of the plot and the characters, because it's already there, pretty much for you, and you can change some things, as I'm sure you do, to make things more exciting, to hide true identities if that's what you decide to do. But you get that sort of that starting point. You don't have to completely go from scratch. You're like, oh, I met this detective and he does this and he does that, and I can put that into the story, and this character did this thing, and then you can change whatever you don't want to. So that's almost an advantage too.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I think a lot of people who watch, listen, and read true crime fiction, or true crime, they imagine that it has not been edited. But if you're doing a documentary, even about a real case, you are having to make editorial decisions throughout the whole thing. And so you are, in fact, throwing a fictionalized cast over it, because you're trying to make this of interest. If it's a multi-part series, you're trying to create cliffhangers at the end of each show, or even if you're doing it for commercial TV, where the ads come. So it is in fact an act of creation, which I think a lot of people who follow this stuff don't really get. And the editors and the directors are constantly making decisions, and they will cut out if a character isn't interesting enough, that character disappears. Then you will find yourself, trying to merge two characters, so two completely separate detectives may suddenly just be a single detective. And I was involved in one of these a while back. The entire team was male, and the production team said, "No, we can't do that. We've got to have some female detectives. We'd like a female CSI involved." And so they changed the sex of some of the players.
Isn't that funny? I mean, that seems so true, and you're right. By putting true crime, you think it's true crime, but all of these things have to, just by virtue of what they are, television shows and forms of entertainment and podcasts, have to follow a story circle. And so that means you have to take the facts and make them fit the story circle instead of making the story fit the facts.
Exactly.
And they sort of define that by saying, I don't know if this is like a rule, but when it says based on a true story, right? That's when they've sort of said, okay, we're going to start with this and we're going to use what works, but we're going to make up other stuff. And I find that whenever I watch this stuff, and I love that genre, but I always find myself Googling some of the crazier things. I mean, did that really happen? Like to see. And
Yes.
yeah, and often I'm disappointed. I'm like, all right, that didn't really happen.
But then
funny,
it's fair to say that the people like me who fictionalize these true accounts, we make the same decisions, but from the opposite end. So we have the whole story in front of us. But one of the things I love about taking a true story and then fictionalizing it is that within the true story, even when you have been involved with the case, for either side, defense or prosecution, you never really get into the heads of the people involved. You see what they do and you present what they do. But the wonderful thing about fiction is that you can interpolate, you can interpret, you've done all the research, or the case backwards because you were involved in it. But then you're entitled to say, okay, well, why? Why did that man act that way? And stuff comes out that when you create the character, you're sort of fictionalizing, rounding out the character, which with details which were not there in the depositions. You can go back in time. You can say, well, he must have had a terrible childhood for him to have done that, or why did she do that to protect her child? And you get to all these sort of psychological insights if you're creating rounded characters, which were never there in the original papers, but they make more psychological truth. And I think that's where the fictionalizing has the real advantage over just the true crime stuff, because you're entitled to round out the characters and come up with your own theories as to why they've done certain things.
Yeah, you don't always know all the facts. And I like, the idea that I didn't even realize, or I guess I'm still not really sure. Is it a rule in the US and I guess Canada that you have to be one of the other prosecutor defense? I guess when I watch all those shows, people are always just one, like every legal show, but I always figured they just picked one, and it's just easier to just go down that one route and stick that to that. But is there a rule that he says you can't, or you just become known as a great prosecutor so you don't do defense?
It's more a bureaucratic thing, isn't it? That the prosecution is normally representative of the district attorney and the government, so to speak, trying to punish the crime, and then the defense are normally private attorneys. Would you say that's right?
In the UK, it's quite different.
Yes, that's in the US.
In the US, yes, it is. I mean, you don't do both at the same time. It's fair to say that a lot of defense attorneys have spent some time in a DA's office. That is very often the way they start, from what I can tell. Although you guys might know better than me. But at a certain point in their careers, they may, because there's more money.
Right.
Doing privately,
not working for the government. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So you sort of like do your time, and then you decide if that's for you or you want to go do defense. But so how in the UK, do you just get assigned, or how does it work?
In the UK, it's just like Canada. It's a referral profession. I believe it's like Canada. I may be be corrected if I'm wrong. It's a referral profession. You get your work through solicitors, who are, if you like, the general practitioners of the legal world, and they will have their favourite barristers for certain types of business, and they will send you work within that field. But I have had days where, in fact, I had an interesting occasion fairly early on in my practice. I was sharing a room with another barrister, and we were co-defending one week, both of us acting for the defence. The next week, he was prosecuting me, and I was for the defence. And the third week, I prosecuted him. And that happens all the time. And then, so the American attorneys I met on my recent trip, I mean, surely you would have talked about the case. Well, how come he didn't go through your papers at night when you weren't there? It doesn't happen. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because it's a very small profession and everybody knows everybody. And if you get a reputation for double dealing or for sharp practice, your practice can disappear literally overnight. So, and I'm not. Go on.
Isn't that funny though, that it's a small profession where you are, but in the U.S. I think it feels like everybody's a lawyer. Everybody's suing everybody. But so when you're working for the defense, is it that you are getting hired by the government then?
You can be. There are certain categories of public law where there is legal aid and you will be paid by the government. Crime is one of the few remaining. When I started in practice, way back in the Middle Ages, there was legal aid for all sorts of things like personal injury work, medical negligence. You go into hospital and you come out with the wrong leg amputated, stuff like that. Immigration work, family work, childcare. Legal aid has largely disappeared from all of those fields now, and so you are paid on what is known as a conditional fee agreement, a little like a contingency, although technically a little different. But for crime work, as long as if you don't have a lawyer and you don't have the money to pay for a lawyer, just like in the States and I guess in Canada, you will be assigned a lawyer on legal aid. And the great thing about the British system is that lawyer will be the same lawyer as you could have paid for. There's no sort of public defender system. And one of the things I learned when I was in Massachusetts doing the research for this new series, public defenders are looked down upon. I'm sure there are some extremely skilled public defenders, but there's very little money in it. So the better guys tend to go off and do private work. And so it is recognized that the public defender scheme will not provide you with as good a quality defense as if you can throw money at it.
That's absolutely that is the perception among all the Americans I know. It's like if you get get a dry speeding ticket or something more serious than that, then the difference between getting a conviction and getting off is going to be whether you hire a professional lawyer rather than just take a public defender.
Yeah, and it's actually worse. It's not just the quality of the advocacy either, because at every step of the way you have to apply to the court for money to do X, Y, and Z. Do you want to get a road traffic reconstruction expert who can tell you if this guy braked in time, and so from the tire tracks, you have to pay for it. Do you want to get an expert psychiatrist? You have to pay for it. Do you want to get an expert to look at the forensic evidence, send it off for DNA analysis, blood analysis? You have to pay for it. And each time you have to get permission. So it's slow, and it's sometimes judges say no. So it's not just the advocacy that may be poorer, it's the overall quality of service.
Do you find, I imagine that there's different skill sets between being a defender and being a prosecutor, aside from believing or not believing the client and whether that's a good thing or not. But I mean, there's a benefit, I'm sure, in that allows you to see both sides easier and probably be a more effective defender when you've been a prosecutor and vice versa. But I imagine because of that, it should also give you sort of more well-rounded idea of everything involved, and that should help the writing process too, I would think.
It does. There is some difference. In America, which is something I was very surprised about, the prosecution simply, there are no holds barred. They will go all out for a prosecution. They will work a case to death. They will get every evidence. Money appears not to be an issue at all. They will go really hard at it to get a conviction. In England, the rule is that barristers are not supposed to, and this is the word, strive officiously for a conviction. Their job is to place the evidence before the jury fairly. Of course, they're going to argue it from their perspective, but they're meant to put the evidence before the jury fairly and let the jury make a decision. And so that was something else that all the American attorneys found completely mind-boggling. But that's the position there. And here, I mean, I think this part of the rule is the same. Attorneys are not allowed to do anything that would mislead the court, even by silence. So, for example, in Britain, if you're for the defense, your client says to you, he did it, but can you please still fight the case on his behalf? And for example, I've had a couple of cases like that. You can say to him, well, I'm happy to represent you on a guilty plea, and I'll do my best for you on the sentencing, but I can't, even by silence, put a lie before the court. I owe duty to the court. So if you insist that I have got to continue to defend you on a not guilty basis, I'm going to walk. And the same will apply to the next barrister you get as well. So the rules are a little different between the two places, which I find fascinating. And
is that rule different? Like I thought that even in the U.S., like you're not allowed to, like a lawyer's not allowed to lie, right?
That's true. The lawyers are not allowed to lie to the court. I think it's stronger over here in the sense that you can't do anything that will mislead the court.
I've always sort of I'm not really understood that. Like, let's say, I've killed somebody and I go to a lawyer, and if I thought, okay, so first of all, there's an attorney-client privilege, right? So I thought, I should be able to say it and I can't tell anyone, but then he won't be able to give you a good defense. But at the same time, the other side of that is if I'm going to try to lie to my lawyer, he's not going to give me a great defense either. So I guess that's the problem. Is maybe it's done that they do that on purpose, right? So because if you're guilty, they want to sort of hamstring you a little bit.
Interestingly, defense attorneys, and I asked this repeatedly, I said, don't you want to talk to your client and find out what his instructions are? And they said, no, absolutely not. I'm not asking him at all. I don't want to know whether he did it. I'm going to build my case and put as much evidence before the court to demonstrate it couldn't have been him. But I certainly don't want to talk to him about it and ask him whether he did it, because he might tell me he did.
Wow. So, but don't you have to talk to your client to get the facts?
Absolutely not.
So what? So you do that as well if you're defending on a murder trial, or do you just walk into the room and say, "Don't tell me if you did it or not, but let's talk about some other stuff that are involved"?
Well, that was never my way of doing it. No, I would go through the prosecution statements, the depositions with him, and say, right, I need you to tell me exactly, where is this true, where is it not true, where is it kind of true but there's a different gloss on it which you can explain to me. I needed his instructions on the evidence for the Crown on a line-by-line basis. And yet when I went over to Massachusetts, I was watching cases. I watched a murder case too, and I said, we were just watching it, we weren't involved in it. And I said, what do you suppose his instructions are about that? And the attorney I was with said, I don't suppose the defense counsel's asked him that. It was quite an eye opener, and I'm having written 11 books, all set in the British legal system. I appreciate that I am going to have to be very careful about the way I write for the Massachusetts legal system.
Now,
Fortunately,
you have a following in America, don't you? Quite a big following in America.
I do, which is interesting. I've often wondered if it's the wigs that really attract people. Because I mean, I do wonder how somebody who has not grown up in this system could look at these idiots wearing, 16th century headgear and 17th century gowns and think, what the? But yeah, they do seem to like it, and I don't really understand why. Maybe if I come over there again soon, I'll do a talk to some of my Charles Holborn fans and say to them, okay, what do you like about this? Because I think it seems to be a very English thing, and yet it does seem to have a following in America and in Australia and Canada as well, which are much more similar systems.
I mean, I know in America people love British TV. There's a service called BritBox where you can watch all of the British show, because there's such a thing. There's such a unique thing. Britain's obsession with like cozy murders and stuff like that, which America can't really provide.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially didn't they? Angela Lansbury did an awful, made half a career out of people killing one another genteelly in various village settings. But yeah, I agree with you. The majority is not like that. But I don't know. Although I'm writing about real cases, I've never really been attracted by all the blood and gore. I guess to that extent, I'm an old-fashioned writer. I'm certainly not writing cozy crime. But I get very interested in the people behind it. So, give you an example. This was called it's called the Waxwork Corpse, but it was a real case, and she was called the Lady in the Lake. Chap dropped his wife's body in the deepest lake in Britain, and I was involved with the case. It's a fascinating case on a pathology basis, because it was one of those strange cases where her body was discovered 10 years after the event, and she was completely and perfectly preserved. Because what happened was, if you don't, I will just tell you briefly. Wastwater is the deepest lake in Britain. It was carved by glacial action, so it's got a sort of rounded bottom, and the bottom third of the lake is just silt. And this chap knew that if he could get his wife's body in it, the chances are she'd never be found. He was a very unlucky guy, in addition to having a wife who was really not a very nice lady. He didn't know that protruding from the base of the lake, or the side of the lake, was a thing called Tiffin's Rock. It was like a finger of rock. It never broke the surface. And the only people who knew about it were the local diving fraternity, who used to use Tiffin's Rock for their night dives. They would have to navigate out to it, turn around, and then come back. And he managed to get in the middle of the night. He drove all the way from south of England, several hundred miles, to Wastwater in the Lake District. Took a dinghy with him. On the way, found a piece of concrete by the roadside. It was part of some roadworks. Put the concrete in the car with the dinghy and the dead wife. Gets to Wastwater, blows up the dinghy, gets the wife into it, ties her to the concrete, rows all the way out to the middle of the lake, and tips her over, and down she goes. And he landed her right on top of Tiffin's Rock. And in fact, had she stayed there, the chances are she would have deteriorated, because the water was warm enough. But in fact, she rolled down a couple of feet. And if any of your listeners are thinking of disposing of a human body, they might want to start taking notes around now. She landed on a ledge where the water temperature is maintained between 0 degree and 1 degree centigrade throughout the year. And when you put a human body into water of that temperature, it becomes adipose, wax-like. And she was perfectly preserved for a period of 9 or 10 years, which is why we called her the Waxwork Corpse and not the Lady in the Lake. And how he came to be arrested for the murder 10 years later is the story. If people can see the book. So I had all these prosecution depositions. I had the original pathology reports. I had the photographs of the body. I had everything, all the such as it existed then, all the scientific evidence. But I got fascinated by the personalities involved. What happened in this marriage that led to this, and why was she so disliked in the village that no one bothered really to look for her?
Yes. That's very British.
Yeah.
And we
I was thinking maybe he told people that she ran off or something.
This woman had a series of boyfriends whose identity she never hid from the husband. The husband always knew when she was going out with one or the other of them, because she'd come back with black eyes and so on. Because she always picked these dangerous men in sports cars who used to hit her. But when she left and never came back, everyone in the village, including the local police, was so used to the fact that she used to go off with these guys for weeks or months on end that no one really bothered to look very hard. So it was a bit of an embarrassment to all concerned when the body surfaced 10 years later and she looked exactly like the day she went down. Wow. So it was the people that interested me, and that's why I loved fictionalizing it, because I could get into the heads of the people involved in a way which was never there from the prosecution papers. And in fact, I didn't get to know the guy well at all until after the case, and he came out of prison. But that's another story.
I will say that the way you describe these is really compelling. I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna have to Google this.
Yeah, well, if you look it up, yes, you could buy the book. I think the book's better than the story, actually, for the reasons I'm talking about. It's and I realized that there was a love story underneath the murder, which needed to be revealed, and that's what I did. And that's the fictional bit. But I always include a historical note at the back so that the reader knows where the real true crime ends and where the fictionalization has taken over.
Okay, so you sort of list out the things that you made up and versus.
Yeah, I mean, I don't list them, but I will tell them this is the true story. This is what really happened, and they'll be able to work out for themselves where I've taken liberties. But I like to think that people who take true crime stories and then put a fictional gloss over them, in some ways get closer to the truth than just a simple recitation of the facts, no matter how well dramatically they are portrayed. Being able to fictionalize gives you a whole different palette to play with.
Well, I mean, wasn't it Ernest Hemingway who went on about telling the truth, writing the truth? It ends up being more about authenticity than facts.
I don't know. If he did, I should look that up, because that's a really good thing to remember.
I'm wondering, like, if you are writing about cases that are well known, are you concerned that the readers would already sort of know the ending, I guess, or is the ending not even sort of the point? Especially in something like this where you're really telling the character story, but often a true crime is about the crime and about sort of the resolution of the crime, and if you already kind of know how it ends, does that ruin anything, or does that not even matter? Because it's really about the story and getting. I
think that's a really, really good question, and I think a lot of whodunits are very often, especially with psychological thrillers, they are whydunits as much as they are whodunits. I mean, and in true crime, of course, people can just simply go on the internet and look it up, so they can find out the reality. I mean, I'm afraid I am guilty of this as much as any 16-year-old. I very often watch these things on television with my iPhone in front of me, and I'm looking stuff up on Google and going, pausing, did that really happen? And then you see the differences. So I don't think it matters too much that people know the resolution. They are interested in the journey. Why did the crime occur, and how did the police track this guy down? I think it taps into something primal, our need to understand violence mortality and the randomness of fate. And so the fiction side of it lets you explore that safely in a narrative shape. It's fair to say that I think that real cases do carry an emotional weight that invented crimes can't really match, because the reader knows that actually happened. And so they love putting themselves in the position of thinking, what would I have done? Or would I have spotted that man's lying beforehand, before the police actually did? When I write about cases from the 60s, I mean, this is a good example, this one, Corrupted. This is a story about the most egregious cover-up of a paedophile ring that Britain has ever seen, and almost no one's heard of it. But
we are the world champions in that.
We've got expertise in that field. That's
yes.
entirely true. But it all involves the same summer as the Profumo affair. Now, I don't know if you've heard.
John Profumo, yes, I do remember I mean, I don't remember it, but I knew about it. Craig might not be as familiar, but it was a big deal that my parents would talk about, and they made that movie with Joanne Wally Kilmer with it.
Yes.
What was the case?
It was a guy called Profumo. I don't know, Craig, if it sort of made it across the pond. He was the Minister for War, who was found to be having an affair with a call girl, she didn't call herself a call girl, who was also having an affair at the same time with a Russian spy. And so a lot of secrets were being passed in pillow talk. And this all came out, and Profumo was disgraced and sacked eventually. And the Conservative Party, who were in government at the time, had to change their leader to Alec Douglas Home from a guy called Chamberlain, whose name you might remember from from war histories. And it almost brought the government down. So it happened. You might have heard of a woman called Christine Keeler, who was also a lady of slightly doubtful virtue, but who a very attractive young woman, and slept with a lot of people she really shouldn't have. So it made all the newspapers, but this particular story it happened at the same time. It went completely under the radar. No one's written plays about it, or books, or films, and yet it's far, far worse, in my opinion. It involved a confluence of the corrupt Metropolitan Police, certain completely corrupt paedophile politicians, and guys called the Cray twins. I don't know if that name rings any bell with you, but they were a couple of
Ronnie and Reggie. Yes,
Ronnie and Reggie Cray. They were twins. They were certainly psychopaths in Ronnie's case, and they ruled the London underworld for that, and most of London for a large period of the late 50s through the 60s until 68, when they were finally sent to prison after multiple murders. They controlled almost all the crime in London, and that book, Corrupted, deals with this scandal which involved all these people, the corrupt politicians who the Crays paid, including very senior politicians, Tory grandees in the House of Lords, and corrupt coppers. But again, fictionalizing it allowed me to delve into the psychology of some of the people concerned, in particular the Cray twins. Now, there've been lots of movies about the Crays. I'm trying to remember. Tom Hardy was the most recent, who played both parts. I can't remember the name of the movie.
It strikes me.
Or something.
It strikes me how all these these big scandals almost brought the government down. That stuff is like every day happens now in Washington, and nobody bats an eye, right? Like how times have changed.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
I wanted to ask, so the books, are they? Are you just sort of telling the story like in a third person, sort of like here's how it goes, or do you have like a main character that you sort of insert into each one to keep a thread going?
I've got a main character who it goes right the way throughout the series, and his family. I'm afraid I have little patience with these writers who write the sort of formulaic books, so their character never changes, never ages. There are certain very, very famous writers who do just that. 33 years in, and they're
Jack
kind
Reacher.
I didn't like to mention names.
No, listen, I'm a fan of the Reacher books, and I suspend disbelief. He does those things every week, and so it's fine that there's 30 books. He's only aged a couple.
He's an amazing writer. He's absolutely a superb writer, and he's created a fantastic character. And I love the books, but I've worked out recently. I think he should be 69 now. Maybe a little older, and I find because I'm writing about real cases and real people, I just feels wrong that they shouldn't. They should be sort of frozen in aspic. I want to make them older, so he goes through the 60s. The first book's in 1960, and it's essentially one book a year. And he gets older, and his relationships change. I mean, he starts off, in fact, as a. And we see this in flashback. He was a bit of a criminal. He dabbled in crime. He was an East End heavyweight boxer.
And he's Jewish as well, isn't he? Which is quite, and that's interesting because in America, like we have more Jewish people in New York than they have in Tel Aviv. But in Britain, there's only a small community.
That's absolutely right. And when I started at the bar, there was immense anti-Semitism, very like there is today, and also class prejudice. I came from a working class family, which made me really the odd man out at the bar. The days when I first qualified, they were all rich public school boys. They'd all been to. They all came from well-to-do families. They all had been to public school, which in America or Canada is private schools. They'd all been to Oxford or Cambridge, and they all had relatives who were involved in the law, a high court judge here, a solicitor there. I had none of that. I came from an East End core Jewish background. My dad used to joke that I was like a bacon sandwich at a bar mitzvah. I did not fit in at all. So I've used that prejudice and the difficulties I had at the beginning of my career for my hero, Charlie Horowitz, or as he changes his name to Charles Holborn to try and avoid the stigma of having a Jewish name. And he follows the series the right way through. I try and deal. I mean, I'm not on a crusade, but prejudice in all its forms really pisses me off. And so my books include gay people. They include women, even though
women.
Yes, women. Even though there were almost no women at the bar in those days, and they include people of color, because I face prejudice and I get it. So I'm dealing with a lot of what I think are still, the sort of the things that ail society even now. There are huge parallels. That huge time of change then in the 60s, and the where we are now. And I think the themes are still there.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going to be sort of making those little changes, but also the bigger change of, you have this one central character that's going throughout his books who obviously wasn't involved in all these crimes, yet, you're inserting him in there. So from that perspective alone, you're already saying, okay, I'm diverging from the true crime, and this is true crime fiction, right? But I think, as long as you can do that and sort of have him as that casual juror, or you can have him replacing one of the lead detectives on the story and not really change any of the key points, right?
Exactly so. And in fact, if you think about it, when you get into true crime, you almost never meet the lawyers. You meet the investigators, you meet the scientists, you meet the witnesses, but you never meet the lawyers. In reality, lawyers are brought in after the policeman has grabbed the collar of the accused and said, "You're nicked, sunshine." That's the point where the lawyer gets involved. So In fact, I am not really fictionalizing much at that stage. And all the books are courtroom dramas, but they all show the run up to the case and how it develops. And then we have the truth finding in court. And I don't feel as though I'm actually changing much by inserting my barrister in it.
There's a wonderful long-running TV show in America called Law and Order, which has the police arresting people and then the prosecutors prosecuting them. But it goes back to what you were saying earlier, because it's a police prosecutors, the person is always guilty. It is about, we have to make sure they pay the penalty, which is not what being a barrister in the UK is.
It's not what the court process is like either,
no.
Because the court process is about finding the truth. And it takes skill to work out that particular witness is lying, and sometimes more importantly, why. Or that particular witness is absolutely convinced they are right, but they are in the end mistaken. And so that is when the truth really emerges. I think that's why you get queues around the block at the Old Bailey, but I guess in most American big courts as well, you get queues of people waiting to fill the public gallery, because this is real drama. You have people with one story, and you have another people with other story, and it's up to the attorneys, or the barristers in my case, to ask them the right questions and contrast their evidence with other people's to find the truth. And then that's not only the question of what is true, but the weight to be placed on each little piece of evidence. So the attorney is kind of like the chef putting together a meal, or maybe the ringmaster of the circus. Bringing all these things in to create a story that the jury will run with. I used to describe it as, because sometimes, especially when you're for the defense, the jury won't even look at you. They look, when they hear the nature of the charges against your clients, you can see them all turn to him, just turn their nose up in disgust. And because you're representing them, they don't want to make eye contact with you. But if you're doing your job right, and you've got the straw to make the bricks, you can put the evidence before them, ask the right questions, get them to see it from a slightly different perspective, and then if you're doing your job right, gradually, one after another, they will start making eye contact with you. They will start nodding when you make a point about the evidence. If you're really good, you can even make them laugh when you say something funny about the evidence. And I used to describe it as spinning plates on sticks, running up like in a circuit act, right? Getting one plate spinning, thinking, okay, that one's running, now go back to the beginning, get that plate spinning, okay, that one's good, get the next one spinning. And if you're doing it right, by the time you sit down, you have got 12 members of the jury all nodding at you, all agreeing with you. You can see it in their eyes and their expressions, all laughing with your jokes, and you've got them in the palm of your hand. And you can sit down and think, okay, I've done it. It is one of the greatest feelings in the world, and I try and bring that into the books to show what it's like to really actually be in a courtroom. And I'm very fortunately, I get a lot of reviews saying I could barely breathe. It was like being there, right in the middle of the trial. So
that sounds well. What a wonderful place to wrap things up, because we're approaching the top of the hour. So, but yeah, that's brilliant. Well, okay. Final. And where can people find out more about your books?
They can have a look at the website www.
And more about you.
Yeah, well, there's a page on the website all about my history at the bar, and I also write blogs on it to keep people up to date with my musings about law and all things legal, and about writing. So yeah, www.simonmichaelauthor.com.
That's wonderful. Well, we will pop a link to that in the description down below. So if you have enjoyed everything that Michael has shared with us, Simon Michael was confused with the two first names. I apologize. If you have enjoyed everything Simon has shared with us today, make sure you scroll down and click on that link and go and check out his website and his books, which I will be doing because you hooked me on a couple of the things you were talking about. But while you scroll down there, you'll also see that big empty comment section. Make sure you leave Simon a comment and let him know how much you appreciated everything he shared with us today. And there's also that like button, so give that a smash. There's the bell, the subscribe button if you haven't already, and the bell icon that if you click, you will get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked, which of course there will be next week. So until then, cheerio.